Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Amazon's new healthcare rollout called the Amazon Clinic. And we're also going to talk about how streaming platforms have been dealing with some cancellation issues. So we're going to jump right into it. Good morning, Dee. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I've been waiting to talk about this streaming stuff for a little while now because a lot of it happened while we were out kind of between seasons. So now's a good time to kind of like take a review and see what happened. But I think first we should talk about the Amazon healthcare thing. It's something I believe that we both predicted a little while ago.
Absolutely, yeah. So Amazon. So first of all, here's how this came about. So this wasn't like Demetrius and I saw an article about it or anything like that, and then started reading. There are some articles out there that were dropped a couple of days ago regarding this new kind of a soft rollout, as we like to say. I actually received an email from Amazon that was kind of quiet in the sense of just like, hey, we have this new like Amazon Clinic. And there was a few things that caught my attention in the email, and it sparked the initial conversation of this on the podcast. So first off, the way the email came through, it basically said, find treatments for common health concerns, no visits or video calls needed. Choose one of 20 everyday health concerns. So this is very specific language that works around a very specific kind of process. So when you're choosing to address common health concerns and having a limited list of them that doesn't require visits, doesn't require video calls, you're kind of tapping into a very specific type of game. Um, and I feel like this is kind of getting into that Walmart, CVS type of approach where there are things that people deal with on a regular basis. And
Hmm.
those things aren't catastrophic in any way. And they want to be able to service the hundreds of millions of people that may have these conditions or may have these little issues and just need a little bit of support. And they want to do it in a better way. They want to do it in an experience that is more streamlined, that is easy for them, especially if you're an Amazon subscriber.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I think overall it is a good thing. I know that a lot of people will look at this and say, "Oh, Amazon's getting everything. They have so much data about you, all that kind of stuff." But fundamentally, there is just a shortage of healthcare um, being provided at this point in time. I was supposed to go in and get like a colonoscopy last year for cancer screening. My father had cancer, that kind of stuff. And I called in and was like, "Hey, I need to get this cancer screening that's been ordered by my primary care physician." And they were like, "Well, the soonest we have is 6 months from now." I was just like, "Really? It takes 6 months to get cancer screening? This is like a 20-minute procedure." I mean, you have all your prep and stuff involved, but it's so hard to get any kind of visits, especially with specialists, anything right now. So anybody who's inserting more supply into that system overall is going to be a good thing. It's going to help bring costs down. Help. It's not going to be a silver bullet. I don't even know if costs are actually going to come down. Maybe it'll just help costs from continuing to rise. But just adding more supply to the system is good, and it is similar to like CVS, their Minute Clinic and things like that. It'll be interesting to see how they integrate with what else is going on. I think CVS has a system for communicating with your primary care physician,
Yep.
making sure that they're aware of everything that's going on. What I'd be interested to see is Amazon as a company who is objectively has been better than pretty much any healthcare provider I've ever seen at managing data and moving it back
Hmm.
and forth and making sense of it, can smooth things out. I mean, HIPAA and other regulations are one of the reasons why that is the way it is. But they can smooth things out so that all of the communication and scheduling and everything that goes on with healthcare just kind of takes a leap and goes to the next level because it's an industry that desperately needs to be shaken up.
I think it's a challenging industry because of HIPAA and because of all the regulations, but we need a lot of those regulations in order to protect consumers, right? So
Yes.
we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard spot, and that kind of I think that's kind of where um, I think that's where that whole common health concerns, 20 everyday health concerns, is like dealing with things that you can actually wrap your head around, wrap your hands around. They don't require visits, they don't require video calls, they don't require a lot of contact. And maybe a lot of it is simply just getting you medication, providing a little bit of treatment options for things that are not life threatening or catastrophic. When I think about this, I think about the word trust because you know, I would say maybe 20 or 30 years ago, I was looking at data recently about 20, 30 years ago. It's like, the majority of people would have an issue and they would just go to their doctor, or they'd go to the hospital if it was, a little more worrisome or something. And then we got
Hmm.
into this phase where I read this article that said that for baby boomers, the urgent care became their primary care physician.
Hmm.
And I think that's when this became the opportunity. Because
Yeah.
what does that actually mean? That means that you don't have a doctor that knows you, that you go to and you see when you're feeling sick during the wintertime or when you sprained your ankle or any of those types of things. You're basically just showing up at urgent care and getting help in the moment when you need it from any doctor that's available who's on call, but they don't really know you. So they're just kind of
Yeah.
taking a look at the issue and then working from it. And I think a lot of these tech companies, including, places like Walmart, CVS, and everything, they looked at this and they saw it and they said, well, if they're going to urgent care and paying a lot of money basically until they meet their deductible, why wouldn't they just come to the place where they pick up their medications? Why wouldn't they come to the place where they do a little bit of their shopping? You
Hmm.
know, and Amazon sees it as like, why not provide support to the people that I have a truck driving to their house on a regular basis, showing up and providing them with everything from COVID tests to, foot inserts for plantar fasciitis, right? So I see this as like this huge opportunity, and I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. I know some people are like, "Oh, I don't know, Amazon and Walmart like providing my healthcare," but these are issues like you said that just need to be taken care of. They're not
Yeah.
necessarily life-threatening, right?
Yeah, and it can take that strain off of the more serious medical system. The things that are required for the things for more serious ailments. And one of the big things for me that I've noticed is just like a question of like, all right, I don't know if this is what I'm experiencing is normal. As I age and start to things start to ache and
Yeah.
stuff like that as you get over 40. I don't know if this is something I need to go to the doctor for. I don't know if it's something I need to go to the ER for. Is there something's going on and it's weird and I don't know what to do about it. So just having that resource of someone to talk to who can give you an advice of like, for something like that, go to the ER, or something like that, go to urgent care, or something like that, just make an appointment and wait for your doctor in 3 months when they're available.
Mhm.
There's that level of kind of triage to a certain extent. I mean, triage is supposed to be just stabilizing and then sorting people to determine what their level of urgency is. So it's kind of triage. It's a kind of pre-triage of determining like what is your level of implementation that you need.
Mhm.
Um, that I think helps quite a bit. And if that can be done before somebody even gets to any kind of care provider, that's helpful. And you said something really important where you started saying, let's go put this in places where people already go, right? So that for CVS and Walmart and some of those places, that's in their physical location, that's in their stores. For Amazon, that might be coming to your home. Maybe you have, a nurse practitioner or something like that who can, or a physician's assistant, or maybe even a doctor who can come to your home and check you out, especially for people who might have limited mobility and fewer people are driving these days, those kinds of things. And that's a fundamental aspect of just user experience that I don't think is very common within the medical industry, which is, you meet your users, your customers, your patients where they are rather than asking them to go somewhere where they aren't. And that can just get increased engagement. So if you can get like a medical checkup at home, you just schedule it and they can come knock on your door or somewhere that's close to you if you're not close to where your primary care physician is. If you can get a lot of that stuff done nearby, that will increase a lot of the preventative stuff that people need to get done that can keep costs down, keep ERs from getting filled up because people will catch things early and not waiting for them to be major issues.
You talked about something that I think really kind of sparked this interesting thought in my head. So I listen to some podcasts that are basically like around the most cutting edge research when it comes to medical stuff. Like I kind of like listening to like what is being what's being pushed out there. Maybe it doesn't have all the data in the world to back it up, but like kind of what is the thinking basically around kind of the new research that's coming in from places like Stanford and Harvard and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And one of the things that came about on a podcast I was listening to was that realistically, for a lot of people, having your blood work done twice a year is actually better than doing it once a year,
Hmm.
because it gives you kind of the middle of the year, the end of the year. Let me ask you a question. Do you feel like if they said, okay, this is free with your Amazon Prime service, you get your blood work checked twice a year, and we'll come to your house, let's say 4 times a year if you're not feeling well, like you're sick during the holiday season, or whatever, whenever it is, like you have a cold or whatever, and you want to get checked out. Um, do you feel like you'd feel comfortable having a nurse practitioner or someone just pop over to your house, ring your doorbell, put on a mask, come in, and then draw blood, do a little basic workup on you, and then leave?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, they're professional. I know they're coming from a professional organization. I don't see any problem with that. One of the things I noticed is that my primary care physician is about a half hour drive away from me, and they're actually not that far. It's just driving in Silicon Valley can be a pain. But the lab where I go to get blood draws and urine tests and stuff like that is like right up the street. It's less than 5 minutes away. I could probably walk there if I
Yeah,
wasn't having a busy day. And that makes it so much easier to get in there and to get the test in because I don't have to plan for an hour round trip in order to do that. And one of for me and for a lot of people, I imagine, especially since the ACA required covering preventative things like annual physicals, it's not so much the cost, it's the time. Like it can be hard to get away to do these kinds of things. And then you got to plan it and then you've got to schedule it and it can take months in advance and all those kinds of things. Just the usability of the experience, basically, to take a Silicon Valley kind of product development perspective, the usability of the experience is so inconvenient. And anything that can make that a little bit more convenient, especially for preventative stuff, because that's the thing that people skip. They always go of like, oh, I've got to, I need 15 stitches in my hand. They're going to go to the ER and get that done.
totally.
But they're going to skip things like their annual checkups. They're going to skip things like their teeth cleanings and things like that because I don't really need it. I can put it off. I'll deal with it later. And then later becomes 6 months, and then 6 months becomes a year. These are all things that, like, things like that, like annual health care checkups, your mammograms, your colonoscopies, that should all just be as easy as possible because the more of those issues we capture before they require extremely difficult, time consuming, expensive interventions, the less costs are going to be, and the greater the access to healthcare for the people who are going to have more difficulty, people who are going to have more complex cases. They're going to get better care overall too.
I mean, going to the doctor for a lot of people is like going to the gym. It's like the further it is away, the more friction you have and the more it costs, the less like you are to show up. Right? Like I
I'd
feel
say
that
it's
way.
worse than going to the gym because some people really like going to the gym. I don't know
Yeah.
anybody who likes going to the doctor.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, just that idea of like, oh, if I have to drive somewhere really far and,
Uh,
to go to a doctor, and then for some reason, like, you know, I think, well, that thing on my arm that's been infected for 3 days, maybe it'll heal, right? Instead of just going and getting it taken care of and moving on, I feel like
yeah,
is the right way to do it.
yeah. I think you can talk to just about anybody, and they will tell you a story about some romantic partner that they had, and they just said to them like, maybe you should go to the doctor and get that checked out, and they were just like, maybe, just because of
Exactly.
the cost, the inconvenience, the like just logistics of getting there. Like, are they just going to tell me that, oh, it's nothing, don't worry about it, and I just wasted my time and money coming down here? Those are
Yeah.
all those are all legitimate concerns.
Yeah. So there's this gray area that I've been analyzing that I feel like nobody ever talks about. And I want to bring it up here on the podcast. And basically, here's the gray area. The gray area is, let's say, D, you have I don't know, like something on your eye, like a sty or something, like a bump on your eyelid or something, right? It's kind of bothering you, and
I don't
you're
know why
like,
I'm the example. You
oh,
could make
well,
yourself the example.
let's say that I have a
I
sty
was
on my
leading
eye.
into a question of what I would do.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah. So you have this sty on your eye, right? And everybody's like, "Oh, guess what? We have these like video calls nowadays, right?"
Hmm.
And then you do the video call, and they say, "Well, it's really hard. I really need to like see it in person." And I've had so many people tell me like it always goes from a video call to like, "Well, you got to come in because I have to examine it." And it's like there's this huge gap in the middle there, right? And the gap is that person doesn't want to go in for whatever reason. They would love to do the video
Hmm.
call. They're more likely to do the video call, which is great. You know, you're getting
Yeah,
some sort of support. So where's that gap? That gap must be Amazon showing up with someone at your front door.
could be. Yeah, very much so. It is a question of, who is that who's showing up at your door, and how do
Yeah.
they like, what's the whole back end process of making that happen? Like, how does that flow through from whoever you're talking to? Are you talking to, is your video call with your primary care physician, and then he contacts Amazon to send somebody out, and they have somebody
Mm.
who's qualified who can take a look at what's going on? There's a lot of questions to answer. There's a lot of kinks to work out. It's one of the reasons why I think they're going with this kind of quiet, soft launch to kind of work out a bunch of the kinks. And if things start to work out, I think it'll eventually be, if you have a sprained ankle, if you have like allergies, if you have some of these common things, you can go through Amazon, and then over time, I wouldn't be surprised if they form relationships with a lot of the major healthcare providers around the country, and are providing kind of like auxiliary services in order to keep people out of emergency rooms and urgent cares.
Yeah, yeah, and that would be super helpful because, like, if you show up at an urgent care and you have something going on, it be that kind of is a little worrisome to you. I think it'd be great to be able to get seen within the first 15 minutes,
Yeah.
not within
Well,
2 hours.
anybody out there listening to this, if you have something going on, go ahead and get checked out, because for all you know, it could be a fungal pandemic, and we want to prevent that. If you've
Exactly.
seen The Last of Us, we don't want The Last of Us to happen. So go get checked out.
Exactly. The last thing I wanted to mention about this topic, because it's a kind of a fascinating topic, because I see pieces coming together, but I don't see the full ecosystem. There's 2 parts to that. One is that from a 30,000-foot view, you have tech companies that are trying to get into this healthcare game by providing support via hardware devices. So you have like, I wear my Apple Watch. It tells me if I have AFib, or, it measures my temperature or my balance, or I fall, or, okay. So you have all those types of components, right? Then you have the Amazons that are like trying to do something. We don't know exactly, but we're kind of speculating that they'll want, get medication delivered to your door, help you out with all these basic, needs and that kind of stuff. And it's all kind of patchwork. You're still going to have a doctor, but then you have Amazon, and then you have CVS, sending you text messages to remind you to pick up your medications and all this kind of stuff. If you take a 30,000-foot view and we look at the future of this, are we going to be able to stitch all this data together so the story is told? Because one of the things that I heard is like the biggest issue when someone is dealing with a larger health concern is that they
Mhm.
go to one doctor and they say, okay, I'll help you with this problem. And then you go to another doctor and they help you with this problem. But those two aren't talking to each other. And a
Yeah.
lot of times when those two work together, they can kind of combat a problem quickly by saying like, oh, okay, you're giving them this, you're giving them that. If we do X, Y, and Z, those will work well together. And then, you know what I mean? It's basically that
Yeah.
collaboration thing. And I feel
Yeah.
like this becomes more with a disparate, right? When you have like everyone kind of playing the game a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm looking at for Amazon and how they manage data. Because one of the things that happens is that, as you mentioned, you go to one doctor and they're going for something, and maybe you go to your primary care for something, and they send you to a specialist, and what the specialist finds out, or their opinion doesn't necessarily flow back to the primary care physician, so they might not be on the same page. Or, if they send you out to somebody else, maybe if you need surgery or something, like getting the information to where it needs to be is a challenge. And part of that's technical, and part of that is just the way in which the information is presented from one doctor to the other. So the way in which one doctor enters their notes and the other person receives those notes might not be the most efficient. So for the data presentation to get figured out, and that is a user experience kind of focus and kind of a usability of the data presentation to make sure there's clarity. and speed. So if you're going to an urgent care, like when you said earlier that people, some of the boomers, their urgent care was their primary care. The
Hmm.
problems with that is they don't have the time to really look at your history and ingest it and see what that means.
Correct.
Like the complexity of everything that's going on. People are not simple instruments. So they don't have the time to do that. That's one of the reasons why you have a primary care, because they build up this like institutional knowledge about you. And when you're going to new doctors or for whatever reason, or your healthcare is getting kind of, like you said, it's becoming disparate and it's becoming distributed, then how does the person who comes to your house who isn't your primary care physician, but is kind of providing data back to them, how does their communication work out? And that's something that I'm hoping a company like Amazon, who is pretty good at that kind of thing,
Hmm.
can help to smooth out. Because we've worked in medical, specifically like on medical devices and things like that, and the it's not just the regulation that makes things difficult. It's also the way in which some of these companies have implemented their response to the regulation, because some of these things feel like they're from 20 years ago and haven't been updated, and you're just in this like crazy HR hell where you almost have to like take files and download them and write in and then print them out and then write out your report and then rescan them and send them back. It's There's a lot of opportunity for the impact of HIPAA and other regulations to be moderated and updated and become much more smooth. And that's something that these tech companies could also have a positive effect on.
Yeah, and I think our first foray into all of this stuff was when the tech companies, like Google and stuff, had all this health information basically on Google, right? And people can go
Mhm.
in and like see pictures and do those types of things. But I think what we've learned from that experience is that the healthcare provider that actually has hands-on experience and is trained in an area is a much better option than Googling things. And I love the idea. I mean, there was this talk a while back of like, well, like do how much do we really need healthcare providers if all the information we need is online and we just have to have like a step-by-step screening process? People are terrible at it. I'm terrible at it.
Yeah.
If I have a fungal thing on my finger, you look it up, it says you could just have a common fungal thing. And then right below it is, or you can have a flesh-eating bacteria that came from your cat or something. You're like, oh my God. And the next thing you know, you're having to go figure out which one it is, right? And
Yeah.
so I love the idea of stitching all the data together. Everyone has access to it that you grant access to, almost like a
Hmm.
personal API, a health API,
Yeah.
right? And then if I want to have Amazon come over, they're like, oh yeah, it looks like you've had this condition or you've dealt with this or dealt with that. Okay, good to know. Now let's get started and take a look at what we need to take care of today. Right? Like that's the way it
Hmm.
should work. Getting there, that's always been the big challenge.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, a human body isn't. It's not your car. It's not your PC. It's not. There's no instruction manual. They weren't designed for maintenance. There's
Yeah.
no like diagnostic tools or built-in diagnostic tools like an ECU or something like that on a car.
Yeah.
These are, they were kind of designed. Well, human bodies, I wouldn't say were designed. They exist in a way that is not intended for maintenance. It's just intended to work and maybe to have its own redundancies and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's you can't treat it like you go on YouTube and see how to upgrade your RAM, and that's going to be how your body works. So it is a lot. A lot of the resources online can be really helpful, and they can, if you have a clear diagnosis, it can tell you these things. Um, but at the same time, you can always have some weird presentation where, like, some hallmark symptom of this disease or disorder, or whatever it is, isn't present in you, and you might have something else going on. You could have comorbidities in which you have multiple different things going on at the same time, like uh, psychological things like anxiety can
Hmm.
cause just like so many symptoms that can look like other things, and you don't know unless you're treating all of it. So it is kind of at that point. You're having digestive issues, you're having back pain, you're having headaches. That could all be anxiety, and you got to go to the doctor, to your medical doctor, and get that checked out. Make sure it's something serious. But then a lot of times you got to do kind of the psychological work too, whether it's meditations or go get therapy, whatever that is. Go get a vacation and kind of attack it from all sides at the same time. But anybody who's looking for a simple solution, It's like you would from a Google search or a Chat GPT query. It's not going to be there.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just as a point to make to all of our listeners, if you have something going on, go see your doctor. We're not telling you not to. We're just kind of outlining how this system seems to be working and how it's going to
Yeah,
come together. Um,
prevents the
I
fungal apocalypse.
exactly. I think this is a good time to transition over to talking a little bit more about something a little more fun and entertaining, which is kind of the streaming platforms and this cancellation frenzy. And there's a lot going on in this space right now, and it's been fascinating. And I know you've been digging deep on it, and you're excited to talk about it. So why don't you jump on in and let's figure this stuff out?
Yeah, so like we said, for months now, I think it goes back till like middle of last year. There's been this cancellation frenzy on streaming platforms, and it seems like it started with Warner Brothers Discovery and their new CEO. I guess new CEO of Warner Brothers. I think he was already CEO of Discovery when they acquired them, David Zaslav, and with their HBO Max platform. So they started
Mhm.
canceling and removing even produced stuff or not releasing stuff that was already been made. But that was followed by Netflix and Disney Plus and a bunch of other platforms, nearly every other streaming platform at this point. So
Mhm.
first off, there's a question: why did this happen? Now, underlying everything was, there was a demand shift. So things went during the pandemic to being everything in the home, and then it shifted from that from being outside of the home. So where Amazon and streaming platforms and kind of video games and stuff were doing great during the pandemic, now bars and concert venues and things like that are doing great. And the other ones, they're actually, I actually don't think they are doing that bad. It's, they're doing m- much less good than they were during the pandemic when everybody was
Mhm.
stuck at home and watching Netflix 24 hours a day.
Sure.
So one of the things that happened during that, when the pandemic shifted everything into the home, is that all of these companies resourced up. They're like, oh, you got to strike when the iron's hot. So let's hire a bunch of people. Let's produce a bunch of content. Let's flood the market with stuff that people can buy and consume. That way we can get everything that we want out of it. Now, on top of that, Netflix felt like they needed to fill the gap from all the content that was leaving their platforms as people
Mhm.
started developing all of like Warner Brothers and Disney and Paramount, they all started putting out their own streaming platforms and less hosting on Netflix. Netflix started off as a distribution platform, not as a content creator. So they shifted and they needed to fill up their content libraries, and they did that by just producing, honestly, as diplomatically as possible, a bunch of kind of cheap crap that was easy to make and wasn't of very high quality. And then you had, 50 romantic comedies a month coming out
Mhm.
because they were cheap to make and they were pretty predictable and you can just assembly line them out. But it had the effect of just making it harder to find unique, interesting, high quality content. So basically, they developed too much content too fast, and that led to even Disney's new, well, I guess, kind of reanointed CEO, Bob Iger, because he had to come out of retirement to help fix this problem. He made a statement that they're going to be focusing on quality, not quantity, going forward for their streaming platforms, which
See,
I think everybody is.
I feel like Disney Plus always did quality over quantity. Like if you look at it, it doesn't have a ton of content. It has all the legacy stuff for sure. But if you look at like new produced content, it's all very high
Mhm.
quality content. It's like Mandalorian and like, interesting kid shows and stuff. So I always felt like they were already on that side of it personally.
Well, I think I agree with you. I think Disney is one of the better ones when it comes to that. I think Netflix and to I thought HBO wasn't too bad, but they were. I didn't think they were putting out the same consistent level of quality as Disney, for example. And one of the
Uh-huh.
reasons why Disney wasn't as so bad is because they already had that library of material going back 100 years now, right? So they were under less pressure to fill up their content library, but they
Exactly.
also, I think, felt as though they produced more stuff than they should have. And part of that's because most for the most part, when we think of Disney Plus, we think of Star Wars and Marvel at this point. for things that are coming out. Also, Pixar, some a few Disney animated stuff. But we don't think of like what's going on with their Disney TV productions that are going on that are kind
Yeah.
of under the radar, right? Like I had my niece ask if I'd seen a show on Disney Plus, and I never even heard of it before. And apparently,
Yeah.
it's an animated show. It's for kids, and it has really good reviews. But there's plenty of stuff I've never heard of. But overall, Disney's one of the better platforms when it came to kind of this content strategy. And then you had, I think, Netflix and some of the other ones on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I hear all this though, and I really feel like what was really going on, D, was this typical Silicon Valley race to see who can have the most subscribers in the shortest amount of time. And
Yes.
what I mean by this is that like you look at it and you go growth over revenue. And I know
Uh,
that's been a model that's changing actually in the valley right now, but like uh, there was this old model of just like it doesn't matter how much money you burn, it doesn't matter how much money
hmm
you spend. What matters is how many people, how many eyeballs you have. And I
hmm
think they got to the end of the, I don't want to say pandemic, it's not over yet, but like the lockdown or whatever you want to call it, you get toward the end of that and people started going out, like you said, and it started to soften a little bit. And then they had to kind of go, oh, I need to slow down. Like Wall Street's not happy with me spending so much money with not as many eyeballs on it. But you still look at
Yeah.
it and it's like massive amounts of people. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people signing up for these services. And this is clearly the future. Like sitting at home, clicking on a show and watching it is clearly it, right? So
hmm
I think it's more now of just looking at it saying, okay, well, how do we make this profitable? How do we make this the new way? And I do feel like Bob Iger probably has a master plan that is going to work. Like having that catalog, having that many customers on. I mean, who knows? Maybe this is something where it's not necessarily the largest revenue driver, but it's part of the larger package as a Disney lover, right? So
Yeah.
like you're like, I love Disney. I get the package deal, I get the tickets, I get the different things, and we just start discounting certain things and keeping everybody happy and kind of giving them this big yearly Disney package. I kind of feel like that's where they're heading.
Yeah. I
It
think.
doesn't need to be like Netflix where they're just like, I mean, they pump out, you were telling me this and I kind of didn't believe you early on. You said it seems like the quality of Netflix is going down. And I was like, well, there's stuff I watch on there. Then the other day I was looking at it and I was like, there's so much, and I don't mean to say junk, it's rude. I know there's the people, a lot of creatives go into producing these shows, but like it almost feels like I'm watching I don't know, like reality television that was whipped together in like 30 days, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just, I don't know, it's just not as good as it used to be. I find myself watching more Disney Plus. Apple TV's been producing some really great stuff lately,
hmm
and then HBO. And I'm like, how did this happen? Like, how did I wake up one day and suddenly Netflix is like my fourth option?
Well, I think Netflix got into this position where number one, they're the only one of those companies who is comes from a startup mentality of that that perspective that you mentioned of growth over revenue, of just like get growth, 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 spending at growth. And sometimes that means you go too fast. And sometimes that means you make bad decisions because you're just reacting and you're trying to you're addicted to the growth, and you're trying to get there as quick as you can. Now you contrast that against Disney, which is, 100-year-old company, has a massive backlog of content already, has a built-in audience, and they're not dependent on content only as their stream of revenue. I mean, they're making billions of dollars each year through just box office releases of the movies that they make that they end up putting on their streaming platforms. They're making money through resorts. They're making money through merchandise. They're making
Exactly.
video game licensing, which Disney I think has failed to really leverage the gaming model. And I think that maybe someday they'll figure that out, but it doesn't seem to be in their DNA as a company. But they're much less. I'm hard to get away from the word desperate. Like Netflix feels desperate. Like
Mhm.
they're a content company. They're a content company only, and they are losing their content because other companies are saying, okay, well now each studio has to have their own streaming platform. So that means nothing that used to be on Netflix is on Netflix. And instead of kind of, they still have their prestige content, they still have their high end stuff, but they just flooded it And I think a lot of people who were looking at this, I heard people who say like, "Oh, this is great. Netflix is putting out something new every day. They have a
Yeah.
new release every single day." And I looked at it and I was like, they can't all be good. And that's like, I don't want something new every day. I want, give me something from time to time. Like HBO does a great job on their shows, right? They did great with Game of Thrones. They did great with House of the Dragon. This all goes all the way back to Sopranos and Oz, and they're the ones who kind of started a lot of this. But they don't put out like a new Last of Us like every day. They do a production and they release, two or three a year of those high end shows.
Hmm.
So I think that's ultimately kind of what a lot of these companies need to do. And they're starting to realize that. And let me tell you, I'm going to transition here and talk about another topic here. The visual effects shortage that's going on,
Hmm.
which is partially caused by the massive boom in content creation, which burned a lot of people out, and now it's difficult to get visual effects
When
for
you
your
when you
shows.
say difficult to get it, what do you actually mean by that? Like you
Well, I
can't
was just
find people
listening
to
to
work on
the
it?
no, you can't. And if they do, you don't know how much time and effort they're going to devote to it.
Mm.
So I was just listening to the podcast for The Last of Us. I love that show. I've already mentioned it multiple times. If you're out there and you haven't seen it, absolutely watch it. It's unbelievable. But they were talking about how they got lucky when it came to the visual effects because there's such a visual effects shortage that the studios are picking and choosing which projects that they take, and
Hmm.
they'll turn down people, and it's not even a question of money because they have so much work that
Wow.
they are just picking the stuff that they want to work on. And they got lucky because of the following of the game and how good the game was. That like Weta and some of the other visual effects studios were like, oh yeah, absolutely, we want to work on The Last of Us, and it's going to start affecting some people because if they want to produce something and like it's going to be maybe a little bit harder to get original content out there that don't have a franchise behind them
Hmm.
because you now have to kind of convince the visual effects studio to support you for something they've never heard of. So like movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is fantastic, but was completely unknown, might have probably did have some challenges getting the visual effects
Yeah,
completed
and the thing
because
is that like if you're so does this mean like if you're like an aspiring visual effects person, this is like a really great time to be looking for work in that area?
not
Is it?
really because one of the challenges is from an economic standpoint, what you would do is, all right, we'll start paying more, and that will help the visual effects studios to expand and have more capacity, or new studios to crop up. But because of the way in which the content creators, the studios, have done this content strategy,
Mhm.
what they want to do is they want to put out things for low cost because they're trying to put out low cost stuff to fill their libraries, right?
Oh, I
So
see.
imagine, your Netflix who had this content strategy of just pump out stuff as fast as we can. That doesn't mean that you're going to pay more for individual stuff because you're trying to keep the margin low. You're having a high volume, low margin strategy, which
Mhm.
means you're not looking to pay more in order to get the same content made.
I see. Okay. Oh, it's yeah, it's that's really interesting that there could be I think a lot of the times we neglect to understand the shortages that occur whenever there's a boom
Mhm.
in a particular market. Like we reported on this, I think, what, 2 seasons ago, that there's been
Mhm.
tons of new studios, meaning like the actual
Mhm.
physical buildings popping up in LA and New York and other places, and they're just like renting them out like crazy because there's just so much content being produced. And so that
Yeah.
kind of plays into this as well.
You're looking at, this is all the effect of the massive boom in content that was created. So if you look at the number of TV shows, and I'll try to find this and post this when this goes up on YouTube, but if you look at the number of movies that were released in um, 2019, the last full year before the pandemic hit, and 2000 or 2007 before streaming, it's like tripled, I believe, in the number of movies that are released each year. So anybody who's saying like, "Oh, hey, this streaming is killing cinema," I think it's doing the opposite. It's actually allowing a lot more content to get made. So a lot of the indie stuff that we're seeing, like small studio independent film stuff that we're seeing, would have never been made in the 90s when everything
Hmm.
was much more dependent on that. And that was when a lot of this indie stuff was getting really popular. That's when, Pulp Fiction and all these movies and Desperado and El Mariachi and all these kind of indie films were really getting going. But even then can't compare to what it's been like more recently.
Yeah. It's super, super, super fascinating. At one point I wanted to make about Netflix because it kind of popped in my head as we were talking, is that I actually really like Netflix. I just lately
Mm-hmm.
haven't liked the content as much. One of the things that Netflix actually does really well is it does produce great comedy shows. And that's something
Mm-hmm.
that I watch on there a lot is the comedy shows. And more recently, one of the things that they released was these shows where they follow around professional athletes and give you like a
Mm-hmm.
behind the scenes look at it. And I almost feel like, and I know this is really early to say this, but I feel like they're kind of finding their feet. So it's almost like, okay, well, I don't know what the data looks like. Obviously, they have all the numbers, but if you're starting to have a lot of traction or have had a lot of traction in areas like, documentaries and comedy shows and things like that, maybe they'll tighten up a little bit and focus more on what the customer really is coming after and pull back a
Yeah.
little bit on these like you said, new show every day, new show every week, which ties into needing special effects people, ties
Yeah.
into, all this kind of stuff.
Well,
And
they
maybe the
already
whole
have. They've already
yeah.
started. They've already slowed down on the content creation, which I think they're learning the lesson. I think one of the things that Netflix would be best for Netflix at this point in time is just getting some patience because they seem so eager to solve the problem that they're
Mhm.
jumping to things that I think are going to make things worse, like the new password sharing rules that they
Yeah, whatever
announced
happened
and
with
then they
that?
pulled back.
Like, I did get an email about it from them, but it was more like, "Oh, this is how many people in the household can use it," or something, but that was a while
Yeah.
ago.
So there are some analysts out there who are putting together, I think, some pretty poorly interpreted data. And so they're looking at how many people are sharing passwords, but they're probably not looking at how many of those people. They're not doing anything to find out, actually get actual metrics on how many of those people who are getting a shared password would actually sign up for it. And the answer is pretty low.
Yeah.
Because there's a reason why they don't have it to begin with, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is like maybe there's not enough content on there. I don't pay for Netflix anymore because they keep canceling all the shows that I really like,
Yeah.
which is another major content issue. They cancel a great show like Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, in order to make more romantic comedies that I don't want to watch.
Yeah.
So they got one season, or Glow, which I loved, which could
That
have
was
had
awesome,
more
yeah.
seasons. But that got canceled, and it wasn't a very expensive show to produce, I don't think, in order to make again more of these kind of factory movies. So that's part of an issue with their content creation. I think that they lack a little bit of the kind of artistic, um, just kind of devotion to the material to make sure that these stories get completed.
Mhm.
And people are complaining about that. A lot of people say that now they won't even watch a show until it's 2, 3 seasons in because they don't want to watch a show that's really good and give it a chance just for it to get canceled. So it's becoming this self fulfilling prophecy where now they're having a hard time getting good shows to get an audience because people are so pessimistic about their cancellation policies.
Yeah, there was a show that I had this experience one time myself, actually. There was this show that I think I told you about that was so good that I actually stayed up late because you know me, I go to bed early. And so I actually stayed up late and was watching like every night. And it was about this group of people who are the first ones to go to Mars, and it was
Mhm.
awesome. It was awesome. And then they just canceled it like right after the first season. I mean, it was like a great first season. I was like so in. And I was like, why did you cancel it? That was fantastic.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, they don't even tell you really why. They just kind of pull the plug on it.
Well, this is one of the things where if you look at Breaking Bad, it's not till the end of the first season that you're just like, okay, this is amazing. I need to keep watching it. For the
Yep.
first, few episodes, they're setting the stage. They're making you feel what Walter White is feeling, so that the things that he does make sense. If you didn't have a studio, and AMC was great at this, that was committed to telling more of the story and getting past that first season into the second season and getting people engaged, then that show would have never been made. That's one of the best shows on that's ever been put on TV. So
Mhm.
this that strategy for Netflix, I think, is an issue.
I felt
I
that
think
way
what happened with
honestly, D, I felt that way about Yellowstone, is that I decided I wanted to watch
yeah.
something different that everyone was talking about, and those
Mhm.
first couple episodes, you're like, I don't know what is going on here. Like, and some of these characters are kind of gross, and so my brain really wasn't committed. But I was only committed because other people told me, like, hey, once you get into it, it
Yeah,
becomes like this, kind of Breaking Bad meets like Sons of Anarchy or something, And
yeah,
I was like, oh, okay, cool. And now I'm into it and I like it and I really enjoy it. But like, I would have dropped off probably if
yeah,
no one had told me that it was a good show.
yeah. I think that what Netflix looks for, because I think they're a little bit, and we are people who our whole lives, or our professional lives at least, are built around metrics and data. But you can't just rely on just your quantitative data in order to make your decisions. You have to get a broader perspective, and we say that all the time. Uh, and these shows, sometimes you got to give them more time. You got to give them some room to breathe. But that, what we're just saying right there, you can't rely on just the quantitative data. You can't rely on just your surveys or just your viewing data. You have to understand the reason why things are happening. That, I think, brings us back full circle to that password sharing rules that they
Mhm.
announced and took back. Because I think what happened was when they announced it, people started canceling, and they said, "Oh, no, 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 we were just kidding." Because what happens is, um, what we would advise is look at the password sharing as, a use case that provides value. That is,
Mhm.
somebody's paying, what is it now, 15 bucks a month for YouTube or for
Mhm.
Netflix.
Oh, for Netflix? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's somewhere like 14.95, yeah.
So 14.95. They're paying 14.95 a month for Netflix. Part of that's because they're sharing it with like a family member. So they're kind of getting a 2-for-1 deal. Now you
Mhm.
take away the 2-for-1 deal and you're paying $15 a month just for yourself. It's not worth it anymore. So I'm going to cancel.
Yeah.
So
Well, there was also this
they're
this
they're
th
decreasing the value of that membership, and by doing that, they're going to lose subscribers. You're not going to have a net positive in subscribers. You're going to have a net negative.
Well, I mean, is this kind of thing like where, you have to look at it from both sides of the coin, right? So like a long time ago when, musicians would make music, everyone would copy their music, right? And then they would
Mhm,
give it out to all their friends and then the band became very, very popular over time. And then
mhm,
there became this other thinking of like, oh no, like all these people are copying my music, I'm losing all that money, they're stealing my music, right? And then
mhm,
to some extent here, I feel the same way. Like so many people are kind of connected with Netflix and certain shows that are on there because of the fact that they say, okay, you sign up for Netflix. Let's say they're college students. You sign up for
mhm.
Netflix and pay for it and give me access. I'll sign up for HBO. And now we have Netflix and HBO. We both get to enjoy it. Right. So I
Yeah.
understand the idea of like someone's not paying for the stuff that you create. I get that. I totally think people should pay for stuff. But at the same time, like, giving a little flexibility in there and allowing friends,
Mhm.
up to a certain number to share something, I think is just a way of saying I want a vast, large amount of people engaging in my content.
Yeah. I mean, you look at one of the reasons why Minecraft and Call of Duty are some of the biggest games in the world from a
Mhm.
revenue and sales standpoint is because YouTubers make content about their games, and Nintendo is famous for not really letting people do that. So when the YouTube gaming phenomenon first started, they were using content like from Minecraft and Call of Duty that was like, all right, well that's copyrighted. You can't use that. That's ours. And they had to figure it out in order to allow that to happen, because that is how games get marketed these days, is on Twitch and on YouTube. So if your game isn't being played on those platforms, nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to become aware of it. The way in which you would market to people previously, where you buy TV commercials and stuff like that, that's pretty much gone. You watch live TV now these days, it's all boomer stuff. It's cash for gold and stuff like that. You cannot reach younger audiences that way. You have to use some of these social media and content creation platforms. And anybody who not is not on board with that because they're hung up on like somebody's using my intellectual property in order to enrich themselves, you're just hurting yourself by keeping yourself out of that game.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that this year we're going to see consolidation though? Like, there's been a lot of talks about Netflix potentially selling to a company and just becoming an arm of it, or like with the Warner Brothers, HBO, and all that stuff. I don't even know what's going on with Discovery at this point. Like, do you feel like this is the year of consolidation? We're going to start seeing some of these assets picked up and placed underneath other brands and making it just simpler for the consumer?
No, I don't. I'd be surprised. Like Netflix still has the most subscribers of any company in the world. I think they are more concerned about their stock price as opposed to the health of the company. So I don't think it. I think they're fine if they are patient. They introduce a good content strategy and become more user focused for a couple of years as far as what the users want in their experience. They'll recover and they'll be able to do more things. The other thing about
Yeah.
Netflix is they've gone from being one of the most innovative companies to kind of falling behind. I signed into um, an Amazon Prime Video account. I'm
Yeah.
setting up my Ads account, and they're right up front, like, "Oh, start a watch party
Yeah.
with somebody else. You can watch with your friend on the other side of the country or your husband who's on deployment. Start a watch party and watch a movie together." Which I know tons of people who do that, and it's a great experience for people who are geographically separated. And they had that Netflix party, third party web app for a while where you could watch things with people remotely. But Netflix, I don't think, has supported that natively, and it's an obvious thing that needs to get done. That's a huge use case that they're left on the table. Same
Yeah.
thing with gaming. Like they've stuck their toes in the water. We've talked about this on this podcast with just some mobile games, and I don't think that's going to get that done. I think the future is going to be something more like Stadia didn't do very well, but I think they were ahead of their time, and they just didn't understand the market. At some point, somebody's going to crack that. Amazon's trying, but they aren't promoting it very much.
Hmm.
It's gonna need to be somebody who really understands that gaming environment. Like it's gonna come down to Valve and Steam and maybe Epic. But Netflix has an opportunity to stream video games because they have a lot of the infrastructure in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sounds like we're just going to have to wait and see, D, right?
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to stop today. We can wrap things up. Thanks, everyone, so much for taking the time to listen to us today. We really appreciate it. As we've mentioned a couple of times, we are now posting all of our updates as well as our video versions of the podcast on YouTube at the X Podcast. So if you can go and subscribe, that'd be great. The channel is still getting filled out. We got everything categorized by playlist for per season, so you can go back and listen to some of our older episodes, and then all of our newer episodes get dropped on the same day that they get dropped on regular podcast players. So if you like this podcast or found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you use. So thanks you all, and we will see you next week.